Engineering the future, how market leaders stop reacting and start creating. You know what should keep you up at night? It's not the competition doing what we're doing, just better. It's the realization that in 2026, your biggest competitor isn't another company at all. It's the future itself. Let me paint you a picture. Most businesses I've worked with over the years, whether as a chief risk officer or when I was running my own internet solutions company serving dozens of financial institutions, they all had one thing in common. They were brilliant at reacting. Someone launches a new product, they respond, market shifts, they adapt, regulations change, they comply. But here's the thing. By the time you're reacting, you've already lost the game. I'm Scott Lindsay, and I've spent decades in the trenches, from the boardroom of a publicly traded bank to building a startup from scratch. And what I've learned is this: true market leadership isn't about being faster at adapting. It's about engineering the disruption before anyone else even sees it coming. Today, we're going to dissect how elite organizations stop playing catch-up and start building the future. Not theory, not fluff, real practical strategies you can implement Monday morning. And hey, if you're getting value from this conversation, do me a favor, hit that like button and drop a comment below. Tell me what industry you're in, because I'm genuinely curious how this plays out in your world. And subscribe if you haven't already, because we're going deep on small business risk and opportunity every single week. The myth of reactionary success. So let's start with the uncomfortable truth. The react and adapt playbook is dead. You know what I mean? We've been conditioned to think agility means responding quickly to change. And sure, that was fine in 2010, maybe even 2015. But in 2026, the velocity of change is so extreme that by the time you've identified a trend, mobilized resources, and launched your response, the market has already moved 3 steps ahead. I'll give you a use case that illustrates this perfectly. Think about Blockbuster. Everyone uses them as the cautionary tale, right? But here's what most people miss. Blockbuster actually saw the shift coming. They knew digital was the future. They even had opportunities to acquire Netflix, but they were trapped in reactionary thinking. They waited until the evidence was overwhelming, until the threat was undeniable. And by then, game over. The critical difference isn't about speed of execution. It's about who's defining the game being played. When I was working with enterprise-wide risk programs, I'd see this pattern constantly. Organizations would have these sophisticated risk frameworks, beautiful dashboards, early warning indicators, all designed to help them react faster. But the organizations that truly dominated, they weren't looking at the same indicators everyone else was watching. They were asking fundamentally different questions. They weren't asking, how do we respond to this trend? They were asking, what trend are we going to create? See, reactionary success has a ceiling. You can optimize yourself into irrelevance. You can be the absolute best at adapting to yesterday's future and still become completely obsolete because someone else designed tomorrow's playing field. Decoding the future. All right, so if we're not reacting, what are we doing instead? We're developing strategic foresight. And I know that sounds like consultant speak, but stay with me because this is where it gets practical. Strategic foresight is about identifying weak signals, those barely perceptible tremors in the market that signal what's coming next, not trends that are already trending, you know? The stuff that's happening at the edges, in adjacent industries, in research labs, in regulatory discussions that haven't hit the mainstream yet. Here's a use case from the financial services world. Around 2015, if you were really paying attention, there were weak signals everywhere about distributed ledger technology, not Bitcoin the investment, that was already noisy. I'm talking about the underlying infrastructure conversations happening in technical forums, in academic papers, in small pilot programs at central banks. Most banks waited until blockchain became a boardroom buzzword. By then, the strategic advantage was gone. But the institutions that embedded scenario planning into their strategic processes, they were already running pilots, building partnerships, understanding the implications before their competitors even had it on their radar. So how do you actually do this? You need a systematic approach to environmental scanning. And I don't mean having someone read industry publications. Everyone does that. You need to be looking at cross-industry pattern recognition. What's happening in retail that could disrupt healthcare? What are gaming companies doing with user engagement that could transform financial services? The breakthrough innovations rarely come from within your industry. They come from someone applying a different industry's playbook to your space. Regulatory foresight. Here's where my compliance background becomes really relevant. Most companies track regulations. Smart companies track regulatory discussions. What are policymakers talking about? What white papers are being circulated? What pilot programs are governments testing in other countries? That's your 18-24-month preview of the compliance landscape. Technology convergence mapping. It's never one technology that disrupts a market. It's the convergence of 3 or 4 technologies reaching maturity simultaneously. In 2026, we're seeing AI, edge computing, advanced materials, and biotechnology all maturing at once. The question isn't what each does individually. It's what becomes possible when they intersect. You need a structured methodology for this. Quarterly scenario planning workshops. Not the kind where you assume everything goes well. The kind where you seriously game out, what if our core product becomes irrelevant in 18 months? What if our primary distribution channel disappears? What if our main customer segment fundamentally changes what they value? These scenarios feel uncomfortable. They should. If your team is comfortable in scenario planning, you're not pushing hard enough. Engineering internal disruption. Now, here's where most organizations completely fall apart. They do the foresight work, they identify the trends, they even get excited about the possibilities, and then nothing happens. Why? Because they try to pursue the future using the same organizational structures, processes, and incentives that were designed to optimize the present. You can't engineer disruption with a quarterly earnings mindset. You know what I mean? The innovations that reshape markets don't fit into your normal resource allocation process. They don't show positive ROI in year 1. They can't be de-risked through pilot programs. When I was CFO, I learned this the hard way. You need a completely separate track for future-focused innovation. Here's what that actually looks like in practice. First, you need to institutionalize permission to fail. And I don't mean putting "fail fast" on a poster in the break room. I mean creating explicit innovation budgets where the success metric isn't ROI, it's learning velocity. Did we invalidate assumptions quickly? Did we discover something about future customer needs? That's success, even if the project gets killed. One use case I've seen work brilliantly. A regional insurance company created what they called Future Labs, completely separate from operations, different reporting structure, different compensation model. Their mandate wasn't to improve existing products. It was to make existing products obsolete before someone else did. They staffed it with a mix of internal high performers who were frustrated with the pace of change, and external hires from completely different industries, a video game designer, a data scientist from a logistics company, a hospitality industry strategist. The diversity of perspective was the entire point. Here's the thing though, you can't just create the Skunkworks team and hope magic happens. You need structured innovation cycles. We're talking rapid prototyping methodologies, where you go from concept to testable prototype in weeks, not months. Build, measure, learn, but at a pace that would horrify your standard product development team. And you need executive air cover, because here's what's going to happen. The innovation team is going to propose things that threaten existing revenue streams. They're going to want to partner with companies that your sales team views as competitors. They're going to recommend sunsetting products that are still profitable. If your executive team isn't willing to make those uncomfortable decisions, you're just playing innovation theater. Now let's talk about resource allocation. Most companies say innovation is a priority, then allocate 2% of their budget to it. That doesn't work. The rule of thumb I've used, you need at least 10-15% of resources, budget, talent, executive attention, focused on initiatives that won't generate revenue for 18 to 36 months. That feels reckless when you say it out loud. It should. But you know what's actually reckless? Betting 100% of your resources on the assumption that your current business model remains viable. Before we go further, let's do a quick check-in. Are you seeing these dynamics in your industry? Drop a comment and let me know what signals you're tracking. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. We're building a community of forward-thinking business leaders who aren't content with just reacting to change. Strategic partnerships are another critical piece. You cannot build the future alone. I learned this running my internet solutions company. Some of our biggest breakthroughs came from partnerships with organizations that looked nothing like us: a payment processor, a security research firm, a UX design agency specializing in accessibility. The partnerships you need aren't the comfortable, complementary ones. They're the partnerships that give you capabilities you can't build internally, access to markets you don't understand, and perspectives that challenge your assumptions. And here's something nobody talks about. You need to build partnerships before you need them. By the time you've identified a specific opportunity and start looking for partners, you're already late. The organizations winning in 2026 are the ones who built their partnership networks in 2023, 2024, when there wasn't a specific deal on the table, just mutual respect and aligned vision. Case studies in disruption. Let me get concrete with some examples of organizations that got this right. Look at NVIDIA. Everyone talks about their AI boom, but that success was engineered over a decade. They didn't pivot to AI because it became hot. They were making multi-billion-dollar bets on parallel processing and specialized computing when most people thought GPUs were just for gamers. They saw weak signals, machine learning research, the limitations of CPU architecture, the coming explosion of data. They didn't wait for proof. They engineered their own disruption, systematically building capabilities that positioned them perfectly for a future most companies didn't see coming. Here's what they did that most organizations miss. They maintained their core business while simultaneously building something that could cannibalize it. That takes extraordinary discipline and organizational courage. Or look at Netflix in the early days. The narrative is that they killed Blockbuster with DVD by mail. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is that while they were still mailing DVDs, while that was still profitable, they were investing heavily in streaming infrastructure. They looked at bandwidth trends, compression technology improvements, changing consumer habits around screens. They ran the scenario planning. What if physical media becomes obsolete? And instead of defending against that future, they became the architect of it. The lesson isn't pivot to streaming. The lesson is be willing to disrupt yourself before someone else does. And do it while you still have resources and market position to execute from strength, not desperation. Now let me share something about the messy reality behind these success stories, because it's not all brilliant strategy executed flawlessly. Tesla, another company everyone holds up as innovative, has had multiple near-death experiences. They've made spectacular bets that didn't pan out. The original Roadster strategy, the solar roof timing, the Cybertruck design polarization. But here's what they got right. They built a culture where bold bets were celebrated, even when they failed, where the question wasn't, can we prove this will work, but what would we learn by trying? That's the mindset that allows you to engineer disruption. And they maintained strategic foresight even during crisis. When they were burning cash and everyone said they should focus solely on Model S production, they were still investing in battery technology, charging infrastructure, manufacturing innovation. They were playing a longer game than their critics could see. The counterintuitive insight from these cases: successful disruption engineering isn't about being right all the time. It's about having the organizational resilience to be wrong frequently and the strategic clarity to be right about the big bets. Practical implementation. So let's get practical. What do you actually do Monday morning? First, audit your current resource allocation. How much of your budget, your executive attention, your best people are focused on protecting the present versus building the future? If it's 95-5, you've got a problem. You need to deliberately reallocate. Start small if you need to. Take 10% of one team. Give them permission to work on something that could make your current flagship product obsolete. Protect them from the quarterly pressure. See what happens. Second, implement systematic environmental scanning. Not as a one-time exercise, as a standing rhythm. Monthly trend briefings, quarterly scenario workshops, annual deep dive strategic foresight sessions. Put them on the calendar now. Make them mandatory for senior leadership. Third, build your innovation metrics. And here's the thing, they need to be different from your operational metrics. You can't measure innovation success by quarterly revenue impact. Measure hypotheses tested, assumptions invalidated, future capabilities built, strategic partnerships formed, organizational learning generated. Fourth, create explicit pathways for ideas to move from edge to core. Most innovation dies in the gap between interesting concept and approved project. You need a funded pipeline where promising future-focused initiatives get resources to prove viability, separate from the standard business case approval process. And here's something from my risk management background that's critical. You need to be as rigorous about managing the risk of not innovating as you are about managing the risk of failed innovation. Most risk frameworks are biased toward preventing loss. You need frameworks that account for opportunity cost, strategic irrelevance, and competitive displacement. Look, I know this is hard. When I was running my company, serving all those financial institutions, there were moments where betting on the future felt irresponsible when we had current clients to serve, current obligations to meet. But the organizations that are dominating today, they made those bets when it was uncomfortable. They engineered their disruption when they still had the resources and runway to execute. Closing. Here's the bottom line. In 2026, market leadership isn't about being the best at what everyone's already doing. It's about having the courage and foresight to build what's next before the market knows it needs it. You can be reactive and survive, maybe, but you cannot be reactive and dominate. Dominance requires that you actively engineer the future, that you identify weak signals, run rigorous scenarios, allocate real resources to moonshot bets, and build the organizational capability to disrupt yourself before someone else does it for you. The future is being built right now. The only question is, are you building it or is someone else building it around you? If this resonated with you, I need you to do something. Leave a comment. Tell me, what's one weak signal you're seeing in your industry that everyone else is ignoring? Let's start a conversation. Hit subscribe because we're going deep on this stuff every week. And share this with someone in your network who needs to hear it. The knowledge is here. Now it's about execution. I'm Scott Lindsay. Stay strategic, stay forward thinking, and I'll see you in the next one.